This week is Chapter 2, and I have Section 1 for lecture. This chapter starts off with recapping what we talked about in Chapter 1, as well as saying how we can go into further depth about these learning methods in later chapters. But first, it is important to understand why these learning methods are important. These learning methods are important because it gives human and animals ways to adapt and adjust to new environments. It also gives people a way to change and adapt. This form of learning complements the idea of natural selection. Natural selection. The book gives an example about the pepper moths in England during the British industrialization period. They changed their colors of their wings from black and white speckled to solid black during this period. They did this because the coal pollution was so bad it was turning the trees in the forest black, and moths with blacker wings would be more camouflaged, live longer, and reproduce more, passing on the gene. This process is called natural selection. Natural selection is supported through the study with the finches in the Galapagos. This study gives the example about how after a drought there are less edible seeds for most of the finches, and the only seeds left are the ones with hard-to-open shells. This causes the finches with larger, stronger beaks to survive because they're the only one who can eat. Adaptation and behavior. Ethology is based off the idea that behaviors are partially genetic, and therefore super behavior traits get passed down to future generations. Those behaviors are more likely to reproduce and defined as the study of adaptiveness and evolution of behavior. Ethologists study behavior in nature by observing it, for it is impossible to have one person study the evolution of behavior over time because it doesn't leave a definitive trace, and no ethologist could live long enough to view multiple generations. Nico Timberg was one of the earliest and most important ethologists and studied blackhead gulls in the 1950s, where he discovered that the birds removing the broken eggshells from their nest was an adaptive behavior trait to protect them from predators. Easter Cullen wanted to research further into the idea in 1957 and decided to look into the behaviors of kittiwakes' nests, since the kittiwakes are related to the blackhead gulls but live in a higher altitude. He found that they didn't remove the eggshells but were also a lot less bothered by predators. Along with this, they didn't have any calls for when a predator is mobbing. This shows that how the behaviors can be adapted due to the environment and the predators they are put under. Fixed action behavior. Fixed action patterns are fixed behavior sequences that are triggered by stimulus. In this situation, the stimuli can be called a releaser or assigned stimuli. These fixed action patterns tend to be highly stereotyped. These types of reactions are supposed to be built into genes, and therefore none of them, they're like done the first time you do a situation. They're just known. Elby Elbefusted, I don't know how to say that, I'm sorry. While studying fixed action patterns, he noticed they could be universal, being that everywhere every human knows to smile to display happiness and will raise their eyebrows to begin the motion of smiling. Innate behavior. Ethologists find it is nearly impossible to prove that a trait is innate, as well as they also find it hard for an innate trait to not be stereotyped. A better way to study innate would be through artificial selection. This is where they isolate a trait, only allowing animals with those genes to mate and see if the trait gets passed on to their offspring. In a study done by Tryon in 1942, while he found that maize intelligence to be an inherent trait, but he also credited it to the environment they grew up in. While the two smarter rats raised a smarter child, the two dumber rats raised a dumber child. So this looks into the question of nature versus nurture in this situation. Concluding research, many psychologists have decided innate best refers to the traits that do not have to be learned. They also feel that innate traits can be changed by operational or instrumental learning. This can be shown through Timberg and Purdick's 1950 experiment. Habitation says that even innate traits will decrease over time with repeated exposure. For example, a baby bird gets scared when a shadow goes over them, but after that happened many times, the shadow does not scare them nearly as much. This skill is common throughout all species and allows all humans and animals not to waste unnecessary behavior time. While habitation isn't permanent, it can experience spontaneous recovery, or when the habit reappears after it went through extinction. There is also dishabitation, which is when the recovery of a response after being exposed to a different stimuli still occurs. While habitation is also stimuli specific, with intense stimuli, sensitization can occur, which is when a response gets stronger after it's repeated many times. Thank you.